So he couldn't move.
What they said? Oh my God.
I don't think you're working this way. I do.
Good evening, everyone, or actually afternoon, sorry. Time has been moving quickly this week, so Welcome to Small Painting Sunday and to our judges' talk. We're about to start the award ceremony for small paintings, and then we'll move quickly right along into the judges' talk. It is my great pleasure to introduce once again Jill Carver, who has been doing great work for us all week as our event judge. Jill has been a Plein Air Easton painter in the past, and won the Artist Choice Award herself, as well as many other accomplishments. She is a signature member, and I found out actually yesterday, the vice president of the Plein Air Painters of America. So congratulations, Jill, on that, and thank you so much for coming to Easton again and giving us a visit and doing a great job as our judge. Thank you very much. With that said, we're going to go ahead and get started with awards for Small Painting Sunday.
Good afternoon, everyone. This event just means the world to me, and Small Painting Sunday is a new event since I last did the show. Hands up, who is hosting an artist this year? You rock. Thank you for doing that. It's a huge part of what makes this event successful, and let's see if I can get through this without tearing up. Susan Bryce was my host, and I got some good Susan stories. When I first did the event, I said, well, okay, I'll stay with a host, but I really don't want any fussing over, and I'm going to be busy, and I want to do my own thing, and I'm not going to be really very available. And they hosted me, they teamed me up with Susan Bryce because she had just moved back to town and was literally living out of cardboard boxes, and said that she was way too busy to deal with me anyway. So it ended up being a perfect match because I got to do my thing, and Susan and I became good friends. We shared the intimacy of strangers. We would reconvene at Plein Air Easton every year, and times with her, this is typical Susan. Her energy, vivaciousness, her sparkling eyes, that smile would greet me every day, and we just had a good time. I want to tell one story. The artists back in the old days, we weren't the athletes that you all are today in terms of doing nocturnes. Like, we would finish up at 5 and go to the pub, have a few cocktails. And I remember being in the pub, and the artists, we'd spent money on some booze and then our food, but it was still only 7 o'clock, so where do we go, because we didn't have a lot of money to spend. So I called Susan up and I said, how about an artist party tonight? And she said, awesome, how many? So I looked down the tables in the pub and I did a head count, and I said, could be 20, 25. She said, give me 20 minutes. We all showed up, and she had her full cocktail bar out. She had pork tenderloin in the oven. It turned into a wonderful evening. Susan retired to bed at some point, and there was still a little drinking going on. And there was a couple of artists whose name I won't mention, but they drank a little too much, and so I decided that they should not drive home that night. And Susan was already in bed, so I designated them various sofas and sleeping places in the house. And then early next morning, I intercepted Susan on the upstairs landing, and I didn't want her to have the shock of her life going down into the living room. So I said, I really hope you don't mind, but I didn't want people to drink and drive, so there's a few bodies downstairs. And she looked at me and I was like, I'm really sorry. And she just broke out into this broad grin and she said, that's awesome, I have bodies. She said, I just hosted the coolest artist party ever in the history of Plein Air Easton. And I said, you bet you did. So I came back to Susan every year. She wouldn't let me stay with anyone else. She was pretty adamant about that, and I didn't want to stay with anyone else, so we got into this beautiful routine of when I would fly into Baltimore and drive out, she would have a picnic hamper ready filled with gin and tonics and snacks, and we would go out in her boat to the middle of the bay, drop anchor, and spend the evening watching the sunset. So nothing but really, really good memories. So cheers to you, Susan. She was a real force. Okay, on to the awards. I'm going to start these in reverse order. There are 5 awards, so 2 honorable mentions and 3 third, second, and first place. I do not use, every judge has a right to judge shows their own way. I do not opt to have the quick draw or the small painting show as consolation prizes for those artists that didn't win in the main show. That is not how I judge. So I went into the quick draw yesterday with a fresh pair of eyes and ditto with the small painting show. Okay? So the first honorable mention goes to Jill Basham for Slow Descent. She's not here? Okay. I think Jill has left town, but I'm gonna try and bring the painting up. Okay. There we go, there it comes. Oh, that's right, she's left to go to Door County cleaning. The second honorable mention goes to John Guernsey for By the Pool. Is John here?
I saw him very recently.
Oh, here he is. He's grabbing his painting. Oh, no. Yes. Please. Is John Guernsey in the house? It's a beautiful, beautiful piece. You got it. Third place, this is an award of $500, and this is for a painting entitled Race Day by Elise N. Phillips. Is Elise in the house? She may be doing Door County too, I guess. Is she here? Look at this. Gorgeous. Okay, in second place, this is an award for $750. This goes to a painting entitled Washington Street by Ken Carlick. Yeah, they don't get to spend their money if they're not here. Okay, and before I announce the first place award winner, I'd like to invite Susan Bryce's daughter, Allison Bryce Smith, up on stage, and Ellen Vartney.
So Susan Bryce was my best friend, and when she moved back into this community, the two of us with Plein Air would almost have a contest. We'd go in because I'm the sponsor, and so I got to go in first to put red dots. And we had more fun being first and going in to see how many red dots we could put on. So she had the energy and the spirit of Plein Air. She would buy paintings and put them in the closets to give to her children and her grandchildren and store them up. So she kind of brought that joy into it. So this first painting, or the small painting Sunday, is for her honor and to make it so that collectors, new collectors, can buy a small painting and start adding a collection and become the big collectors. Because all of you artists bring so much joy and energy into our lives, into our community, and I'm so proud of each and every one of you. In fact, turn to the person next to you and say thank you, because you are a volunteer, you're an artist, you're a supporter, you're a friend, you're family, and we love you all, and we're so glad you're a part of the Avalon Foundation. Thank you for being here. And then I'm gonna...
Okay, first place, this is a prize for $1,000, and this goes to a painting called Take 5 by Tim Kelly. It's a live artist. Great photo of Susan, by the way. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that and get a photo. Okay, we might have to do that again.
Spontaneously do it again.
Ready? That's great. Thank you, guys. Okay, so I wanted to talk today about my selections in the main show, and we're going to run through these piece by piece, again in a reverse order. But just some initial thoughts from me on judging, which is a real responsibility, and I think I felt like I owed it to the artists that participate in the show, and I think that I owe it to my trade, my profession, my craft. And not too many plein air events give the judge the opportunity to publicly speak on why they chose certain paintings, and you get these rumors going around that, you know, you chose it because they're your friend, or that you're, you know, partial to expressive brushwork and so forth. And I think the idea that judging is totally subjective is a myth. There are extremely straightforward, objective ways in which you critique a painting and divide them into good or not so good. And I wanted to run through, I know I have a mixed audience of collectors and artists here, but bear with me, I'm not gonna get too technical, but I'd just like to point out a few, you know, a few ideas that when you're looking at paintings you might consider. I also come, not everyone knows my background, I come, you know, as a painter, full-time professional painter, and have been for, 16 years now. Prior to that, I mean, I've painted all of my life, so I'm not going to divulge my age. It's a big one this year, so I've been painting for a long time. I did have a prior career as a curatorial research assistant at the National Portrait Gallery in London, and I did that for 12 years. And part of my job was assessing portraits that were coming through the sales rooms or that were in private collections, trying to determine if they were authentic or studio copies or later copies, okay, and I used to research them through the archive and the records that we had at the National Portrait Gallery, doing a little detective work into trying to put together a provenance for them or comparing historic photos of the same portrait to see if, you know, the cracks in the varnish matched and so on. Through doing that job, I think I developed what I can only call a critical eye, and I think, you know, you develop this kind of visual acuity in terms of looking at something. And part of that is obviously, you know, almost like a spot the difference contest between a photograph of one portrait and a photograph of another portrait, and looking for those tiny differences that might indicate that they are different physical items. But also looking at styles. I think you tune in and you develop a sensibility for what appears to be a genuine brushstroke based on deep knowledge versus one that's based on hesitancy or mimicry. And I think over, you know, the 12 years I was there, I mean, it was great. You know, I could walk into a room in a show and pick out different artists without even reading the captions. It's hard to explain. It's a little like painting. It's just something that you develop and accrue over a length of time. So certainly when I judge shows, I put on that hat as well as Jill Carver as an artist, okay? Obviously, I have very personal preferences for subject matter or for style. When you're judging a show, you try your hardest to put that to one side, and you try and judge each painting in a consistent way, painting by painting. I try not to be influenced by what I know of that artist's work. I try not to look at the name. In this show, that every artist hung 2 paintings, I tried not to let the other painting influence my decision, okay? Because it's not a body of work selection. So the way that I tackled this was very much to walk around both rooms, I think, at least 3 times before I even started on a short list. Because there are those paintings that also grab your attention when you walk into a room like that. And then there's the quiet ones, the sleepers. And you got to make sure that you almost put the blinkers on and do it painting by painting. In this show, there are very specific awards. So again, it couldn't be me walking in choosing what I thought were the strongest 17 paintings in the room. I mean, that was my starting point. But some of the awards were very specific. The Frederick Douglass Award, you know, watercolor, nocturnes. Obviously, that reduces the pool immediately. It's really interesting, because when I used to do Easton, I think we should have had a Best Alley Award, because we were all painting alleys. And then, you know, these rock stars like Susie Baker and Hugh Lai started the Nocturne Challenge, you know. And it's really interesting how it ebbs and flows in terms of subject matter. But I tried to judge it painting by painting. As an artist, I have an opinion on our function. The best way I can kind of get us into this topic is I was painting in the San Juan Mountains, and some people came up to me. They were hunting. It was in the fall, and they were hunting. And they waved and said, "Can we come and see what you're doing?" And I said, "Sure." And they came across, and they took a look, and they went, "Are you just painting the scenery?" So from their perspective, if I'd put an elk or a moose in it, it would have made it a worthy subject matter. For me as an artist on this deep level, it kind of resonated with me, and Jill Carver, scenery painter. It's kind of like, and I know from how you're reacting that, you know, you've got alarm bells ringing too, as did I, because I think, particularly when we're plein air painting, we all slip into that zone every now and again of scenery painting. And I have nothing against scenery painting. But I think every artist knows in the room where you start losing that initial idea, that what I call a motif in a painting. You know, you lose the notion of what that was, and you start drifting into rendering everything that happens to be out there. And as artists, I think our job is to, you know, we make these choices all the time. What are we going to paint? How are we going to paint it? Are we going to choose a certain color palette? What are we going to leave out? What are we going to move around? I think it's the artist's job to make a very individual statement. I don't think it's the artist's job to render fact for fact what is in front of you. And again, I would argue that that would almost be near impossible to do, because every artist is an individual anyway. But certainly when I'm looking at a painting, my initial thought is, was that artist trying to make a specific statement about something? For me, that comes first, hanging on to that idea. So for me, motif can be an object, it can be a feeling, it can be an atmosphere like a sunset or a sunrise. It could be a moment in time like a storm passing through. It can be about shapes, just colored shapes. Or it can just be about color. You know, every artist responds to things in different ways. So for me, I want to see a strong idea that was the foundation for them hitting the brakes in the car and setting up their easel. Did they hang on to that initial idea? Then I'm looking at design. Is it composed well? Where is it placed within the four edges of the canvas? Someone very wise once said that the first mark an artist makes is actually the fifth mark on the canvas, because you already have four edges imposed. It's a very wise idea. You know, you don't view paintings in the same way that you view the landscape, where your eye moves around and you've got this, you know, this kind of vast peripheral vision where things blur out. When we're composing on a canvas, you have four hard edges, and you have to design acknowledging them and within them. So I'm looking for good design. And by that I mean, is the placement of the focal area in a good place? Generally, you don't want it smack bang in the middle, unless you're aware of that and you kind of push it off balance a little bit. Generally speaking, if you were to divide the canvas into thirds, somewhere in that vicinity on that inner box exterior is a good place to put your focal area. So I'm looking for a conscious, a sense that they make conscious decisions in the placing of those big shapes. If you have a focal area that has more information in it, more value contrast, more exciting brushwork, then you also want calm areas, you want rest areas. And I think the hardest, to me, what really shows a sophisticated artist is the ones that are willing to edit things out in order for what they want to say to really shine, okay? So again, it comes back to that motif. You wanna, if it's about this, then you have to let all this other material go. And then we come down to mixing paint and color choices. Is there color harmony in the painting? Have they edited what's out there to make a more harmonious painting? And then brushwork. And what was interesting to me today, going back through the winners gallery, is if you look at those top three paintings, Tim Bell first, Amy Erickson second, and then Zufar Bikbov in third, their paint application is very different. Okay, Tim uses a lot of warm undertones and then very expressive paint. brushwork that tends to be fairly thinly rendered, apart from where he really wants it to catch. Amy Erickson uses thick, bold, juicy paint, direct application. And then Zufa, it's a more delicate application of paint. So for me, it was really interesting going back in, because again, there were 3 very different approaches to putting paint on the canvas. Does that make sense? I mean, these are not subjective. These are objective rules that define whether a painting is good and strong or not. So we'll be coming back round, and I'll be bringing up some of those points, but essentially our job as artists is not to be copying exactly what's out there. It's to come up with our statement on it. An analogy I use with my students is for them to think of themselves as poets and not journalists, okay? But generally speaking, it's really interesting, even to uneducated eyes, and by that I mean non-artist eyes looking at paintings, we will tend to choose, if I put out 10 paintings, we would all tend to zoom in on what we thought were the strongest. So there's a lot of underlying logic to a lot of this process. Okay, so let's start with the honorable mentions. Who's in charge of my slides? There we go. This was just a beautiful piece. I zoomed in on this. Oh, can we go back? This, I think this got a lot of attention because, well, it's just a beautiful painting. And amongst the artists, this light, this kind of high noon light from above, it's really difficult to paint. Okay, you look at the color of that sky, and it's extremely high key, but the sense of light, I look for consistency of light in a painting, okay? I don't want to see ground plane shadows if the sky is solid blue, okay? So I'm looking for that. I'm looking to make sure that the light's coming from a single direction, that you haven't been hammering away on it for 6 hours and suddenly those shadows are coming in from two different sides, okay? So I'm looking for consistency of light. This just, I mean, Mark just nails this. It is absolutely on the money. Just beautiful, this white and shadow here, the variety of hues, but if you all squint at this painting, squint, 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 it just reads, doesn't it? Like, you know that light is consistent throughout, and this is tough stuff to paint, that time of day, but just beautiful. Look at how he lines this up, just off center. You don't want any triangles or masks right in the center of the canvas. So he's just off center to the left there. And look at his, well, his eye level was probably right in here, which is really nice, just under halfway. And look at the simplification. When I say, you know what you're meant to be looking at. There's more information there, there's more detail, there's more viscosity changes in his paint applications. But for me, I kept walking that room, and this painting just kept pulling me back again and again and again. The light in that, he has captured it with perfection. It's a really nice job. Could we go to the next slide, please? I think this is a very appropriate title, Kaleidoscope. Again, squint at it. It's like, suddenly it makes sense. You end up at that figure in the background, but then you've got all this jazz happening, very kind of mosaic-like, pattern making in the foreground. But what I love about this is it slows you down as the viewer, because you're looking into it and suddenly you're picking out, well, she's cutting something up on a board, maybe a loaf of bread or a turkey, and then there's some wine bottles there. And then what I liked was these little circle accents. I forget what Lon said he made those with, but for me, they were the bottom of a wine glass, Like it all added together, it added to this narrative. bowl of fruit back up in there. So essentially, you know, this beautiful, nice horizontals here with these verticals, some more distinct wine bottles setting up right underneath the figure. And then this, talk about rest areas. It's not that restful because it's very busy, but there's less distinction made in this region of the canvas as to what's going on there. It's simply a range of patterns. But yeah, what a refreshing painting to look at. Really nice. Good job, Lon. Okay, can we move to the next slide? Okay, so there are three, I didn't have enough awards to give. There are three paintings inserted at this point in the slideshow that, were I to have more awards, we're going to get them. And I wanted to mention this Nocturne of Zuffa Big-Bov's. I mean, just again, a stunning design. Again, look at this. Look at the stacking of this vertical just to the right of center. There's a beautiful place if you're designing paintings, using the thirds, segmenting that canvas into thirds or quarters is a very common approach. There's also something called the golden mean ratio, which goes way back to the Greeks, and Fibonacci number sequence, but it's essentially 0.618 across that canvas. So it's more towards the center line than a third would be. So a third here would be out here, but this is getting real close. And this is actually hanging in the Winners Gallery. I believe it's part of the agricultural tour that's going to take place. Phenomenal painting. Could we move on to the next one, please? These are extras for your delight. And I wanted to look at the second one of Ken's. He's such a strong drawer. I get a little irritated when I hear people say, oh, well, you don't have to draw to be able to paint. I'm sorry. You need to be able to draw. And if you're going to draw houses and architecture, you need to understand eye level, horizon line, and vanishing points. And Ken knows that inside out and plays with it beautifully. What I like is that he's angled all of these, so he hasn't quite embraced them as total uprights, and it just gives them a little bit more character, and it almost exacerbates that feeling of aerial perspective getting back there. But white in shadow, or those cream colors in shadow, it's really hard to pull off. Look at this, right in here, this lilac shadow shape. Really nice. If you squint at that and look at the dark and light patterns, and this is what I teach a lot in my workshop, is no-tan theory, the aesthetic balance between dark and light. When you're dealing with a scene like this that has very distinct shadow planes and very distinct sunlight planes, you want to really squint and just see what that dark pattern looks like. You don't want one to dominate. You want 50% shadow, you don't want 50% shadow and 50% light. You want one of them to win out. It's a really nice design. Good job, Ken. It's a little extra award. Can we go to the next one? The other way. There we go. I did want to mention Hi-O's figurine. That figurine got a lot of attention, and they were all so close, but really, can we go back? Yeah, really beautiful rendering of that figurine, and with a kind of narrative going on in terms of self-reflection in the window, which is a theme that she's been working on, and I love seeing those themes develop year on year. Nice, American flag banner back there, so it's really nicely handled. Is Hi-O in the house? She needs a round of applause too. She did a great job. Okay, so moving on, I think we had Deborah Hughes's piece. Again, this is, she nailed this scene, and I love, I'd heard that you'd all had this huge rainstorm come through. I was in Philadelphia and it happened there too. And for me as an artist in an event like that, when you see kind of preconceived notions of what I'm going to paint in Easton this week go out the window, and you're responding to some kind of live exciting event. I love seeing that. There were some phenomenal storm paintings in the reserve paintings. I think, let me get this right, Elise Phillips had one of a lightning bolt, and Jill Basham had another one. And yeah, I mean, you just know that there's no self-consciousness there in terms of choosing. They were just flying with what was happening at the time. And we all know that these wonderful sunsets happen afterwards. If we were to consider this a vertical, again, look at that placing. So this would be halfway, this would be a third. She's just towards the golden ratio there. And everything points down to that vertical line. If you haven't been to the Winners Gallery to see all these paintings extracted, please go. They look spectacular, pulled out as a group. Look at this nice little rain shower here. It's almost simply a change in brush direction. You can almost get a value shift just through changing your brush work, because a horizontal, fully loaded brush will pick up more light than a vertical one, just because most paintings are lit from above. So you can get those real subtle shifts there just by changing direction. It's a really nice piece. Thank you, Deborah. Next slide, please. This is Hugh Lie's Oxford Lights. When I was looking at this piece, there we go. I just totally got a sense. I mean, this was a very appropriate award for Hugh Lie from my point of view, because clearly from this, she knows this land and these skies on a deep, deep, intimate level. And that's what I was responding to, the subtleties in there. It doesn't quite show up in this reproduction, but the color notes in the sky and then this reflection in the water was just outstanding. And, obviously a very nice complementary blue-orange color scheme, so nice limited palette. Nice placement of those big dark shapes. Again, if you squint at that and just isolate the darks, you squint, 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 isolate all the darks. There's a really nice balance there. Yeah, beautiful piece. Congratulations, Hugh Lie. Next slide, please. One of the things I also look for in a show is an artist embracing their chosen medium. Oil paint will do certain things for you. Acrylic will do certain things for you. I used to work in watercolor, and I know how difficult a medium that is, especially when the rain is pouring. It's near impossible. But Thomas, both of his paintings were gorgeous in that gallery. They both had really strong dark and light patterns. This one I chose just because of the wetness of the sky. I mean, he really embraced the use of his medium. And it doesn't show here, but there were pink violets in the sky and then in the ground plane. And it was, overall, even though it had this pattern of underlying darks, there was this overall really subtle color harmony between pinks and greens. I run out of time. Is the battery gone? Did I turn it off? Yeah, beautiful, really, really nice harmony between the two. But this is watercolor at its best. Nice, hard edges and then washes into wash. Nicely done. Next slide, please. There were a lot of really good nocturnes in this show this year. Zufar Big-Bobs and Hugh Lie, and then this piece by Tim Kelly. What I liked about this piece is, even though he was playing with symmetrical There is nothing symmetrical about this, okay? If you look really, really closely, talk about strictly handling design and placement of those shapes, and then making sure that it's not overly symmetrical. So I went in and I remeasured this morning, but that little light is just off center to the left. Very specific placement of it. And even though this is a symmetrical building, this shrub tree is very different to this one. This one has all these highlights behind it and is therefore a little more dominant because it has that contrast there. Look at the porch, how the light hits this side but not this side as much. So he was aware of what could be the pitfalls given this situation, but nicely controlled a way around them and utilize them to his benefit. This side is definitely more dominant than this side, just because of the light and shadow, the value contrast there and the level of detail. You also can't see it on this image, but this window up here has a light on in it. So again, that set it apart from this window up in here. And then also what he did was, I mean, the understanding of where his eye level is and the perspective is bang on, off center placement, but then look how he kind of utilizes almost a fishbowl application to make you, draw you into that alcove even more than were he just to have those as straight lines. So, you've got these convex and concave kind of aspects to all of these straight lines here. Tells you where you should go, right? Right through that door. And the whole thing was just nicely handled in terms of, I think the hardest thing about this situation is making that light shine so much, and that's almost your starting point. And then everything else has to go to a certain level of darkness in order for that light to shine. So again, a great awareness of what he had to do to make that work. But yeah, congratulations, Tim. This is the second, Best New Artist. I guess we might come around to this again. Let's go back. This is Amy Erickson, and again, I'll talk about it now because this one's second place as well. And she won Best New Artist at Plein Air Easton on this. I had not seen, I'd seen Amy's work once before in the flesh, but I just haven't seen that much of it, and it's just blown me away. There is a weird thing that happens when you're standing looking at this painting. I go right into this area here. I mean, it's about the light, right? Both coming through the back of these boat awnings. So if we go back to that initial comment of mine that motif must come first. This motif is about the light, okay? If you're standing at that painting and it's still at the museum till 3, and you focus in on this area but not too hard, it's like the water starts moving and that boat starts bobbing. It is so well done and so beautifully perceived and observed that as bold and somewhat abstracted as her brushwork is, okay, there's a simplification of shapes there, very different style to someone, for instance, like Zufar Bigboth. It's very chunky paint application, it's like direct observation, direct paint application. But if you do it right and you still get those color notes right and the value right and the placement right, when you squint or you just spend time with that painting, it suddenly starts feeling very real. And for me, it almost made me dizzy. Like, I was pretty much on a boat dock with that water moving and that boat bobbing. Just fantastic. The reflected colors in here are really nicely observed with these little So it's sun pennies, right? You've got all these little dappled pieces of light here, and they also are bouncing back into that little boat, so that's a really nice observation too. When you look at these on the actual painting, the real highlight is set within a slightly darker value of gray, and then within that, then you have almost the shadow side of that ripple and then the highlight side of that ripple. And there is a consistency here to her seeing that all the way back through here. That's what makes it feel very real. This is clearly the dominant boat. Again, we have a vertical almost on the third line, right in there. We know this boat's the dominant one because there's more information going on in here. Look at these hue shifts through here. And then the little American flag. Here's a nice secondary boat, but it just breaks into these beautiful shapes. I think when people use the word, it's more abstract, it's really interesting to question what you mean by that, because I think in this instance it's like a process of reduction, okay? You're taking away a lot of the detail and subtle hue shifts, and you're reducing it into more simplified shapes. Or abstraction could be that you extract an element and then you amplify it. But yeah, this is one of my favorite pieces in the show. Good job, Amy. Next slide, please. This is Nancy Tankersley. I think this was a square, right, Nancy? Isn't it interesting how, because it's full of verticals, it looks like it's a little off square? And this is something I like playing with in the studio myself, is you take a square canvas and you put a dominant vertical in it, and suddenly, visually, it stretches that canvas, and ditto if you were to do a strong horizontal. But just, again, if you squint at that, just beautiful placements of the big shapes. A very distinct focal area right up in here. Look at the placement. Again, it is slightly off-center. It's between that center and that third line. Beautiful placement. Really nice color harmonies going on. This, in reality, when you're looking at the painting, has more pink tones. So she's playing pinks and reds off against greens in this area. And then as you go up, it's violets playing against yellows and a nice blue against an orange right in there. So really nice color harmony throughout. We know she was editing what she was seeing when we see something like that. That's the artist's control. It's their depth of knowledge showing. What I like is I like so many aspects of this, but look at this. If this were a straight line, it could have been quite distracting. But what a nice little trick just to vary it up a little bit down in here and to soften it in certain areas. As soon as you soften those areas, this is what I would call a harder edge. This is a softer edge here. Your eye travels along this line a lot faster than it does when it meets something like this that is softer and more complex. It slows the eye down. So again, she's controlling how our eye moves around this painting. The placement of the vertical, there's, there's decisions taking place, because whenever you have a strong vertical in the canvas, there's always this issue of how do you deal with the top of it. Okay, because you don't want to lead the eye straight out the top of the canvas. You want that eye to come back in around and stay within those four edges. So there's different ways of dealing with that. She could have shot it right through so that you don't have any sky up there, but she dealt with it very delicately. Look how much sky is coming through this structure here. It's like those sky holes start increasing the higher you go up. And then there's this beautiful flock of birds that pull you back down again. It's a really nice circular movement up in there. And when I see that kind of handling and that kind of decision making to deal with what are potential problems, to me that really elevates a painting in my eye. Good job, Nancy. Best Marine, both of Patrick's paintings were really nicely done. They were real standouts in that room. What I like in this one is these, the dock upright posts dominate that foreground. And, when you look at this, it's essentially, bands of horizontal shapes. If we squint, big shape for the sky, a lesser shape for all that clutter that's going on back there, which is both boats and architectural, and then the mass of the water. So if you just isolate those three main shapes back in there, guess what? They're all different proportions. He was very aware of what he was doing. If any two of those shapes had been the same as each other, it would have felt very static. So the fact that they're three different proportions, I love the handling of all this stuff through here. If you go up to the painting and just look at it, it's a lilac gray wash with just the indication of what's back in there. No two things the same. If ever you put two things the same in a painting, the way our eyes are programmed, we go right there. And it doesn't matter if it's two boats the same, two negative spaces the same, two angles the same. Your eye will pick that out and it will go straight there. So what I love about this is through all this mark making and pattern making, there are no two things the same. All the masts are different angles. All these sky holes are different sizes. Even these, none of these actually line up and repeat. Even these two back there, one is thicker than the other one. This angle is different to this one. It's just a very well thought out painting. And then these foreground structures that kind of get you up beyond the strong horizontal. If they had stayed down below, we wouldn't have that sense of standing on the dock. The perspective would be totally off. They need to be that high for us to feel like we're standing on that dock. And then look at the color harmony. So we have these real red, russet browns, red oranges that repeat. They start off in the foreground and they get you up there, and they're more faded and more gray, more neutral, away from the focal area, which is right in here. Look at the placement of these blues. If this sail covering had just been isolated and on its own, it would have stuck out like a sore thumb, but it's balanced it with these little repetitions of that color note throughout. More neutral, away from the subject matter. And then these little, look at this right in here, that's just gorgeous. These kind of colors of the tin cap there. Blues right next to oranges again. It's just a beautiful painting. You know Patrick knows his art theory and his color theory and his design theory when you're looking at this. And the drawing level is exceptional. Okay, so congratulations, Patrick. Okay, next. Frederick Douglass Award. Tina Bowman is a great, great watercolor artist. Really nice. Ooh. Again, look at the design and the drawing in this painting. We have strong verticals, but her understanding of perspective is really intact. It's just solid where that vanishing point is back there. This all lines up really nicely. What I love is when you put figures in a painting, they immediately want to become the focal point. It's a little like putting a door or a window in a painting. It's just how we're programmed. You want to go straight there. What I like about this is that, to me, the figures, they're in there, but you don't go there immediately. And I kind of enter right down in here, because this line is so strong. And this shadow was so beautifully and simply painted. She just let the watercolor work for her in this. That shadow is just awesome right in there. And then you see the car and then you kind of jump aside to the street, but Yeah, it's a beautiful, it's a well drawn piece. Very nice, and it's still just the placement of, essentially if you put triangles in anywhere, your eye wants to go there, but she didn't over render the detail here, nor did she make it too contrasty. She probably backed off a little bit up here, because I kind of go down the street and across the street. I don't shoot out the canvas on that one. So I think she probably put on the brakes and decided to back off of the contrast there. So I love what's happening in this foreground shadow plane. I mean, you can just keep walking around this and see lovely little smaller paintings within the big painting. So good job, Tina. Best figurative painting. Patrick Lee, this figurine, I think it appeared in two other paintings. It's incredibly fresh. It jumps out at you when you walk into the room. Technically, the reflected light under her cheek and chin was again just nailed. It's a little like that Mark Schascher painting that won Artist Choice. It's the nailing of the light, like beautifully observed and then accurately portrayed. And he's playing with a blue-orange complement in terms of a palette, really simplified. I love the lack of detail. Away from the focal area, away from her head, you kind of start losing the detail. Look at this edge in here. Her right-hand shoulder isn't even depicted. It's almost a hue shift. There's no line there. It's almost a hue shift and a really soft edge. So that shoulder just disappears all the way back. If you are able to suggest atmospheric perspective or a plane change through shifting hue but keeping the value the same, again, that indicates to me that that artist really knows what they're doing. I should have mentioned it on Ken DeWard's shadows. I think we've got another of his paintings coming up, but where those cast shadows from the trees, there are greens transitioning into violets there. They're the same value. So when you step back, that shadow shape doesn't start breaking up into too much information. It stays intact. But when you're close to the paintings, you start seeing all these different color shifts. But the value of them stays the same. And it's a really powerful tool to have in your toolbox as an artist. And when I see it happening, it's a lovely thing. Also, what I loved about this piece was there's such character to his paint work, but you know that she's stone, but there's something so alive about her that it almost feels like she's about to break out of the cast and start moving. There's such life to her. That's what I loved about it. There's nothing static about this. It's wonderful. Good job, Patrick. Yeah, this is Ken DeWard. I mean, best hospitality, it was a no-brainer. And I have to point this out. I had dinner with Ellen last night, and I was saying, I think that's Susan Bryce right there. Don't you think? Isn't it? Bright pink dress, blonde hair, the sassy stance. But to me, there's, when we go back to motif, I mean, just this idea that this place sums up Easton for me. Great architecture, these elegant lawns, some kind of shape of this wonderful water that comes through the back that's been dotted by sails. And again, what I was talking about with a value shift right down in these shadow planes, if you look at the painting, there's some really nice hue shifts, but essentially the value is the same throughout this, and it makes it feel like there's more information there without breaking up that shape. This nice highlight on the grass through here is a little bit more saturated than the highlight on the grass here, which immediately gets you back into this line You see this figure, you see the sailboat, and then you start seeing all these secondary points of interest. Again, really a masterful, an example, a great example of mastery in terms of moving the eye around a canvas. This for me was it was a quiet piece in that first room, but again, it was a little like Mark Shasher's piece. I just kept coming back to it. There's an elegance to this and an understatement to this that just lets it speak for itself. Really nice, Ken. Thank you. Susie Baker, again, I love this piece, going back to my initial idea of hanging on to that motif. She was clearly interested, again, a great subject matter for a cloudy day. You go to buildings and farm stuff. There are soft shadows underneath, but I love the palette on this one. You end up in this area here that has these beautiful shapes and color notes rendered in it. And again, then you start moving around the rest of the canvas. I know this is where I'm meant to end up, right in here. But then you start looking elsewhere. Look at this cockerel butt that's sticking right out here. It kind of gets you back in the canvas. There's another chicken there. And then if you look within this shadow plane, again, a really good control over value use. These cows sit within this value plane and they somewhat disappear. If she had painted them as she saw them, like individual portraits of cows, we wouldn't know where to go in this painting. It would be way too busy with way too many focal points. So again, what struck me here was her ability to push these shapes back within what's generally a darker shape on that side. There's secondary points of interest that are just sitting right in there. Again, a nice use of birds so that the sky doesn't end up too much of a flat shape. Guess where they are? They're right above where she wants you to look. Okay? Again, a very, very clear, conscious decision on where they would be effective in terms of placement. It's a great piece, Susie. Next slide, please. So I was talking to Zufar about this, and this was a magical, magical piece. Again, very different paint application to some of my other choices, but so refined in terms of observation. And he told me he'd actually had this idea marinating for 2 to 3 years. And again, I think to the artists out there, I've always found that my most successful paintings are the ones where I've let the idea stew for a little bit, and you keep coming back to it, you keep coming back to it. But first of all, the color harmony in this is just beautiful. These blue-green grays through here are repeated in these uprights, and then repeated in the background and in the window. I mean, there's just beautiful color harmony in here. Great observation of what that water actually looks like in terms of reflected form, that kind of green-brown. But, I mean, boy, the water, the white water that's coming out of the back of this boat, and the way that that froth is on top of but floating around in this reflected form, this right in here was what really got to me. It's just beautifully observed. Look at the little shadow points underneath the white froth. It really gives them a sense of 3 dimensions. Again, we have a very nicely placed upright vertical. Look at that, just again in from the third. Really nicely managed, you know, bits of information that aren't too heavily rendered. They're nice and equal. So it's like we see him and then we go across to the main party over here, you know, in the ferry. So we have a dominant focal point and then a secondary one. So again, you know, he totally illustrated kind of mastering in really managing each of these components of making a good painting. So yeah, Zufar did wonderful work throughout the whole thing. Everyone was beautiful. Let's give Amy another round of applause because we can't talk about you too much. And then let's move through to the grand prize. This piece, I tried my hardest to pick it to pieces, but I couldn't. And it's all those elements I've been talking about. So, a motif. The motif in this one is the sunset theme, okay? He's capturing an atmosphere. Again, we're somewhere but just off of halfway in terms of where your eye goes as a focal area. It's going to go to a hard edge with a massive value change on it, and then a pop of chroma. Look at the placement of this. Really nicely done. You have two boats that physically are the same, but look how they're handled differently, so they're not the same, and the angle helps somewhat. He's claiming a lot of really nice perspective lines in here. But the chroma on the highlights is a little higher key than this boat in here. Look at the detail right on these window frames here that are not here. So we know that's the dominant boat, the red life buoy right in here, the tire, buoys on the side, and this angle coming in here. We know this. Look at the placement of this. It's really nice. Look at where this chap might point to were he to exit the canvas. Probably right up there where this sail mast goes. Really expressive brushwork. It's tighter and it's thicker around the focal points, and there's less detail rendered elsewhere. So again, that gets back to setting it up for having busy areas and then rest areas. So again, you're manipulating where you want the viewer's eye to go. And just beautiful drawing. I mean, both Patrick Lee and Tim Bell, and then Georgette and Cole Carlick, they're more expressive in their brushwork, okay? You see that expressiveness, you see it more abstracted. Look at their drawing, it's impeccable. Okay, so just because you get crazy with the brushwork or the paint, you can't give up that drawing. That very foundation and the strength of design comes from drawing skills, and they all have them. And then the last thing I wanted to mention about this is a beautiful control of color harmony, and I look for that too in terms of designating the greatest from the very best. He's got really nice violet yellow complements going on, and red, orange, and blue green complements going on. So that tells me he's aware of the color wheel, that is setting up a triad or a tetrad on that color wheel, and manipulating everything that's out there to suit his message and to really embrace that idea of the sunset colors and the impact of what a sunset has on every hue. So all of those elements that I talked about are in this painting. There is nothing that bothers me about it. My eye does not go to where it shouldn't go. Even just with a little fleck, it's amazing how much you can pull the eye. When I was at the Portrait Gallery, we had a really fascinating experiment with the Wellcome Center of Medicine, where through some kind of magical contact lens, they were able to track and document how the eye moves around a painting. And they chose, I think, 6 paintings from our collection, and then had a bunch of people put on these special glasses that monitored the contact lens movement, and they would hang maps, and it's amazing how consistent, like 10 different individuals will look at a painting. Entry point would be the same, but what was fascinating was those little specks that would pull your eye across the canvas that everyone responded to. It doesn't take much. It doesn't need to be a big shape or a loud color. It can be something small in a very restful area, and it'll still pull your eye across. So I love the science of how we see, but there was nothing in here that I could pick out and say, ooh. I mean, to me, it was the perfect painting, and for that reason, it was the standout in the show. Everything comes together. It's like magic when it happens. When you see that depth of knowledge and that control and the thoughtfulness of design and color harmony and beautiful drawing and expressive brushwork, it all comes together. And this painting, for me, deserved the grand prize. So congratulations. I went over by 10 minutes, I apologize, but thank you very much for your patience and thank you for listening.